Let's proceed, but maybe the issue of whether we will go beyond 4 o'clock, we could discuss around 4 o'clock when we see how the situation looks like. Yeah, okay.
My mic is off. Sorry, could I just take you back to your evidence before lunch? I got 2 messages from my senior colleagues who understood your evidence when you said you were with Mrs. Zuma's foundation to be that you were with the foundation for 1 day. Could you just clarify that evidence? When did you become the chairperson of the Mrs. Zuma's foundation?
I was in the foundation, I think, for more than 3 years.
Yes.
But I resigned on the 18th of October 2017.
So your resignation followed a day after you were appointed to the SABC board?
Correct.
Was that your evidence?
That's my evidence.
Thank you. Thank you. I think out there it looked at this if you were with the foundation for 1 day. Thank you. Thank you for correcting that. Could you please go back to exhibit, sorry, I beg your pardon, to your statement. Thank you. Could I direct you to page 4 of your statement?
I'm there.
Thank you. There you highlight some of the findings of both the public protector and the ad hoc committee. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yes. Could I just take you briefly to page 74 of exhibit 27, which is written reports and other documents? Okay. That's the big one. Yes. Thank you. Could you turn to page 74?
I am on page 74.
Yes, thank you. Or maybe
I'm sorry, I missed that, Mr. Norman.
I beg your pardon,
Are we
Chair?
back to the
To exhibit 27, Chair, the reports and other documents.
Yes,
Thank
under
you.
at page 74.
Page 74, yes, Chair.
Okay.
This report, as you know, Mr. Makhathini, deals with various matters that were investigated insofar as the terms of reference were concerned. But if you, maybe I take you back to page 73, you will see that they deal largely there with the role of the shareholder representative and there's political interference. Do you see that?
I can see it.
Yes. And then...
I'm sorry, is this the parliamentary ad hoc committee report?
That's correct, Chair.
Okay.
And I've asked
Yes,
the
you
witness,
may
Chair,
proceed.
is shared page 73.
73, yes.
Yes, thank you. You see that they deal with the role of the shareholder representative, and then there's political interference. Do you see that?
Yes, I can see that.
Okay. And then they have, I also identified in the next page the remedies. And then could you just read into the record what remedies are they saying insofar dealing with the issue of political interference?
Okay, remedies 39.2.1. The shareholder representative should assume a more proactive role in ensuring good governance and compliance with all relevant policies and legislation specific to the SABC.
And then-
39.2.2, the shareholder representative's involvement must be regulated so as to ensure that there is no undue encroachment in matters normally reserved for the SABC board. The role of the board, the shareholder representative, the executive, and Parliament should be clearly understood at all times. This relationship should at all times be regulated in accordance with King Code of Good Governance and Broadcasting Act, and where applicable, the Companies Act.
Yes. And then in paragraph 40, they deal with journalistic ethics and related matters. What do they say about editorial independence in 40.1?
40.1.1, as the public broadcaster established in terms of the Broadcasting Act, the SABC must, in terms of the Broadcasting Charter, at all times adhere to the highest standard of journalism, with editorial independence being of uppermost importance.
And if, following that, at page 75, electoral coverage, they deal with that at page 75. What do they say there?
40.1.4.1, the Electoral Commission and the SABC board should ensure equitable coverage during election periods, as well as compliance with Electoral Act and ICASA regulations.
Yes. So your understanding of this equitable coverage, what do they mean by that?
The equitable coverage basically means based on the guidelines coming from the IEC and the representative percentages of political parties, that's how we should cover them in an equitable manner.
Yes. And if I may just take you, so that we finish with the bundle, to what the public protector directed, or at least what her remedial action and findings were, proposed remedial steps to be taken. We will not read all of them into the record, but I'll simply read those that I believe are going to be relevant to most of the evidence that we are going to give. And I would like to direct you to page, I beg your pardon, just a minute. Sorry. I think governance is what is relevant, isn't it, to the board?
Governance, yes.
Governance matters. And I would like to refer you to page 387. That is the Public Protector's report, and it appears under the folder number 10, divider number 10, page 387.
I'm there.
Thank you. I'd like to direct your attention to paragraph 10.7.
I can see it.
Yes. What does the Public Protector deal with there?
10.7.1. The heading is regarding the alleged systematic corporate governance failures at the SABC and the cause thereof. I find that 10.7.1, all the above findings are symptomatic of a pathological corporate governance deficiencies at the SABC, including failure by the SABC board to provide strategic oversight to the national broadcaster, as provided for in the SABC board charter and King 3 report. 10.7.2, the executive directors, principally the group CEO, COO, and CFO, failed to provide the necessary support, information and governance to help the board discharge its fiduciary responsibility effectively, and that by his own admission, Mr. Motsoeneng caused the board to make irregular and unlawful decisions. 10.7.3, the board was dysfunctional and on its watch allowed Dr. Ngubane to effectively perform the functions of the executive chairperson by authorizing numerous salary increments for Mr. Motsoeneng. 10.7.4, Mr. Motsoeneng has been allowed to by successive boards to operate above the law, undermining the group CEO amongst others, and cause the staff, particularly the human resources and financial department, to engage in unlawful conduct.
Thank you. And then the Public Protector in paragraph 10.8 deals with something that you've already, which is mentioned in the report, parliamentary report that I've referred to about political interference. She deals with it in paragraph 10.8.
10.8.1, the allegation that the department and the Minister of Communication unduly interfered in the affairs of the SABC is substantiated. 10.8.2, former Minister Pule acted improperly and in handling of her role as a shareholder representative in the SABC and executing authority. 10.8.3, amongst her most glaring transgressions was the manner in which she rejected the recommendation made by the board for the appointment of the CFO and the orchestrated inclusion of Ms. Doda CV. Her withdrawal of the certain powers from the board was also not in line with the principles of corporate governance. 10.8.4, her conduct accordingly constitutes a violation of Executive Ethics Code and amount to an abuse of power.
Yes. Thank you. And then at page 390, what is relevant for your purposes is what is stated in paragraph 11.3. What is it that the board was supposed to do? But I would like you to simply, because one of your executives is going to talk to all the other matters that follow, but I would like you to read 11.3.1.
11.3.1, all monies are recovered which were irregularly spent through unlawful and improper...
I think you started the heading, Mr.
Yes.
Makhathini.
The heading
The SAB
11.3.
board
Yes.
to ensure that
The SABC board to ensure that all monies are recovered which were irregularly spent through unlawful and improper actions from the appropriate persons.
Thank you. And then lastly, at page 392, paragraph 11.3.27.
392.
Yes.
Paragraph 11.
11.3.27. Page 392.
Okay.
I assume you are deliberately skipping the other ones, Ms. Nome?
Yes, Chair, because the one witness is going to talk to them. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
Still under the heading that says the SABC board should ensure that the roles and the relationship of the SABC board and the COO are defined, particularly in relation to the role of a relationship with the group CEO to avoid the paralysis and premature exits of group CEO while adhering to established principles of corporate governance.
Thank you. And then she also dealt with monitoring at page 393. At 12.2, something that was directed at the board.
Monitoring, 12.2, the SABC board is to submit an implementation plan indicating how the remedial action referred to in paragraph 11.1.3 above will be implemented within 30 days from the date of my final report.
Yes. So we all know that that report was dated, as you've already indicated, 17 February 2014. When you then became the chairperson of the SABC board, did you find any plan that had been prepared in compliance with that paragraph which you just read of the Public Protector's remedial action?
Chairperson, yes, we did find the report and the handover report in terms of where they were, how far they had gone in implementing the remedial action, which was driven by the interim board that was there for 6 months prior to us joining.
Yes, thank you. And then if you may now, Mr. Makhathini, go back to your statement.
Maybe before that, does that mean, Mr. Makhathini, that on your understanding, there had been no plan put in place before the appointment of the interim board? The previous board had not put any plan in place to implement.
Chairperson, that's correct. There was no plan that was put before the interim board came in.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Then, because you got there and there was a plan that the interim board had prepared, is that the plan that you are continuing on as this current board, or did you yourselves prepare another plan? In particular, with regard to the public protector, we continued with the work that was started by the interim board to ensure that there's seamless handover and there's nothing that drops through the cracks. But of course, there's further investigation that we're done during our time as the board, done by the internal forensic, which has produced further evidence of wrongdoings at the SABC. Yes, thank you. And how, if you were to measure insofar as compliance or at least implementation of the Public Protector's remedial action and also the ad hoc committee's recommendations, how far would you say? Are you now at 50% of implementation of all those recommendations, or are you still sitting at maybe 10%? How far would you say you've gone?
I'll put it at about 80-90%. The challenge is that the main reason why this needed to be done was for us to recover monies that were lost irregularly. That process is a long litigation process, but everything that was highlighted in the Public Protector's report, we are implementing. And the 24 recommendation coming out of the ad hoc committee, we've also implemented almost all of those recommendations.
Thank you. Then we go back then to your statement. If I may just direct you, you've already dealt with now paragraph 9 and 10. You've taken those paragraphs. Then something happened then December 2018. What was it and how did it affect the functioning of the board?
In December 2018, 4 board members from the previous interim board resigned with immediate effect, basically making the board to, not to be able to continue with the work that was required by the law. So we became incorrect. And these board members who resigned cited a number of reasons. Others cited personal reasons in terms of their workload. Others cited the issues around the misalignment with what the rest of the board members felt was the independence and what independence of the board meant. And other board members, another one cited the reason of lack of support, financial support from government, indicating that when he took the job to be part of the board, the expectation was that there was going to be funding that will go with the job, which had not come forth.
Thank you. Chair, at this stage, I would like to refer the witness to Exhibit CC23B. This, if you recall, Chair, this is what I had referred to as developments over the weekend. But we had decided, just to put all of this in context, to put in the letters of resignation of the various members. That will be in Exhibit CC23B.
Yes.
I've got it.
Thank you, Chair. Have you found it? Thank you. Can you just go through, we'll go through all those letters because there are some of the matters that these board members are mentioning which are going to become relevant to your evidence and to what has happened recently. Could you just let's deal with the first page. That is a letter from the Minister of Communications dated 2nd December 2018 addressed to the President. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then what does she deal with in that letter?
Subject of the letter, resignation of SABC board member, Ms. Khanyisile Kweyama. Point 1, the correspondent served to advise His Excellency that Ms. Khanyisile Tandiwe Kweyama has resigned as a member of the SABC board with immediate effect, thus resulting in another vacancy in the SABC board. Point 2, the reason for resignation is the appointment of Ms. Kweyama as PRASA chairperson. Third, the resignation is hereto attached. Yours sincerely.
Thank you. And then this morning, then you have not provided us with that letter of resignation when you got these from you.
Yes, we have not supplied.
Thank you,
the
but
text.
you'll make it available.
Yes, we'll source it.
Yes, thank you. And then in this, the second page deals with a resignation of another member of the board, Mr. John Matheson, also addressed to the President, dated December 3, 2018. Could you just highlight what the reasons were for his resignation there?
The reason given here, the dissatisfaction with the Oversight Committee was apparent in the 3 successive hearings and reached across all political parties. My endeavors to persuade the board to change course, including the suspension of retrenchment, have not been accepted.
Yes. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done this. I think I should have just directed you to start from that paragraph, second paragraph, sorry, because we've left out something there. Could you just start from that paragraph?
I apologize for not completing my full tenure of 5 years in this position. I remain passionate about building the public broadcaster into an institution South Africans and indeed Africans across the continent can be proud of. However, I find I am unable to agree with the current board's direction, and in particular, its failure to appreciate the oversight role of Parliament and its committees. The dissatisfaction of the oversight committees was apparent in the 3 successive hearings and reached across all political parties. My endeavor to persuade the board to change course, including the suspension of retrenchment, have not been accepted.
Yes, and then he asked to be released from his...
I humbly
position.
request that I be released from my fiduciary duty as a board member with immediate effect, and that is the 3 months notice period required by the Act be waived and remain willing to serve South Africa as ever.
Thank you. We're going to deal with your understanding of these reasons that are advanced, but for now, for consistency's sake, let's deal with the resignations and the reasons. And then you have another letter dated the 5th of December 2018, and from Mr. Matata Tsedu.
That's correct.
Thank you. Could you also, he was also resigning and asking also for the waiver of the 3-month period in the first paragraph. Could you just read from paragraph 2, the second paragraph?
I wish to also express my gratitude to Parliament, the government of our republic, and the people of this country for having given me an opportunity to serve our nation through the work of the SABC, both as Deputy Chairperson of the Interim Board and later as a member of the Permanent Board. I have tried at all times to live up to the highest possible ideals of commitment to serve our people in line with the mandate of the SABC as a public broadcaster. The work of both the Interim Board and the Permanent Board in rooting out corrupt practices and reversing fraudulent activities speaks for itself, and I am proud that I played my little role in that ongoing exercise. I accepted the appointment on the understanding that resources would be available to fulfill the responsibilities. However, the financial crunch facing the SABC is getting worse by the day, and all efforts by the board to ensure a government guarantee have yielded nothing in over 18 months of pleadings.
Sorry.
It is therefore no longer possible for me to continue in this role and beg your understanding for my action to terminate my membership of the board.
So sorry, just one error there. The last sentence before it is therefore. It says, however, the financial crunch facing the SABC is getting worse by the day, and all efforts by the board to source a government guarantee. Yes, so it's to source a government guarantee have yielded nothing over the 18 months period. Thank you. And then the last letter, also dated the 4th of December 2018, it is written by Mr. Naidu, addressed to the President of the country. Could you then, he was also asking, he was tendering his resignation. Could you start from paragraph 2 of his letter, please?
I apologize for not having served my full tenure of 5 years. However, the inability of some of the board members to understand the difference between corporate independence, accountability, and political interference has led to a breakdown in the relationship with the minister. The SABC has a pressing issue of lack of funds, which requires immediate attention. For that reason, I do not wish to delay the governance process with appointing an interim structure to manage the affairs of the corporation. As such, I humbly request that I be released from my fiduciary duties as a board member with immediate effect, and that the 3 months period required in the Act be waived. The basis for my request is that my immediate withdrawal from the affairs of the SABC board will not cause any prejudice to the board.
Yes, thank you. Let's start with that letter, and then we'll go backwards. What do you understand to Mr. Naidu to mean when he was saying that the board, that is the members of the board, were failing to understand between the difference between corporate independence, accountability, and political interference, and that that lack of understanding had then led to a breakdown in the relationship with the minister? What was happening at this point?
To put it into context, in 2017, there was a judgment by Judge Matujana that basically clarified what is the role of the board and what is the role of the minister. So the board runs the affairs of the SABC. And in that instance, the minister has no right to interfere with the operations of the SABC. And I think to some people, it took a bit of time for them to understand what that meant. It basically meant that we cannot take directives from politicians. We cannot allow any politician to interfere with the work that the SABC has to do, and that is established in law, because that judgment was never challenged. And the issue around, for an example, us resisting oversight by Parliament, it is not correct. You'll recall that at that time, the board had approved a turnaround strategy in about September. And that turnaround strategy had been presented in Parliament, and that turnaround strategy covered a number of elements. One of those was cost-cutting initiatives, and part of that was Section 189, which made a lot of political parties uncomfortable with, because it was an election year and so forth. But
sorry, you're going too fast. So the Section 189, that's Section 189 in terms of the Labour Relations Act.
That's correct.
Yes, so it dealt with retrenchments, am I right?
It dealt with retrenchments.
Okay, so you went to Parliament and you presented that to Parliament.
We presented
as part of the strategy that the board, turnaround strategy that the board had approved.
That's correct.
Okay, so yes, you may continue from there, and you say most political parties then were not happy with that.
We're not happy with that because it was an election year, we were talking about retrenchment, but also the country is facing high levels of unemployment. But the truth of the matter is, if you look at what is expected of board members, they have to do what's best for the entity that they are directors of. Yes, issues of employment, unemployment is big for our country, but we have to make sure that the SABC is viable. And that turnaround strategy included cost cutting. And this is what caused a lot of tensions. If you follow through a lot of the hearings we had in Parliament, all they were begging on was you can't retrench, you can't retrench. But at the same time, we're not offered any alternative to us, for us to be able to turn around the situation.
How much would you say the salary, let's just salaries and all employee benefits, how much would you say they take out of the budget that the SABC has? In terms of percentages? It's
over 45% of our expenditure goes to salaries, yes, which is out of the norm.
No, so then you presented then the strategy to the board, and the board raised these and then Parliament, they raised these concerns that, look, you can't retrench. So then what was your plan B?
Maybe before that, just tell me the important features of your turnaround strategy that you presented to Parliament, to the relevant portfolio committee. Understand that you say it included cost-cutting measures, which I take could lead to retrenchment. But I just want you to tabulate just what you consider to be the important features of the turnaround strategy.
Thank you, Chairperson. The turnaround strategy was underpinned by 3 key elements. The first one is what I refer to as legacy and governance element. That element deals with all the things that went wrong in the past, and the work that is being done to deal with the legacy and governance issues is informed by the Public Protector's Report. The Public Protector's Report came up with a number of remedial actions that talks to what went wrong in the past. So as a board, we took a resolution, and it is still part of our strategy to deal with those decisively. The second one is coming out of the Parliament Ad Hoc Committee report, which also came with a number of recommendations. And as we implement those, we are then driving the legacy and governance issues. The third will talk to SIU investigations. SIU has been with us now since the time of the interim board. They've done the investigation under 2 proclamations that they've been given. Out of that work, they've dealt with about 38 matters. Out of those 38, about 23 of those were DC matters. About 6 of them were criminal matters. About 7 were litigation matters. And the work that is being done there as a result of the outcome of the SIU talks to the first element of our strategy. The fourth talk to Auditor General. Auditor General now and again will come and audit the SABC, and they will come with audit issues that needs to be addressed. There is a plan to address those audit queries, and the team has done a sterling job in addressing those. That's the fourth one. The fifth element talks to about 180 forensic reports that have been done by our own internal forensic. And those 180 forensic reports give us an extent of the rot at the SABC and what needed to be done to address what may have gone wrong. So that's the first element of our strategy, to ensure justice and to make sure that the wrongs are corrected and to make sure that we correct what was done wrong, but also create a sense that people are being held accountable and there is consequence management at the SABC. We are driving that under that pillar of legacy and governance. The second element of our strategy talks to what I refer to as policy and regulatory issues. There is quite a number of regulations and policies that have put SABC in a financial dire situation. One of those is the mass carry regulations. The mass carry regulation basically says our competitors can carry SABC 1, 2, and 3 at no cost to them, but at millions of cost for the SABC. If you look at the programs on SABC 1, 2, and 3, they are the most popular programs. They are the most watched programs. So to have other players making money at the expense of SABC is unfair. So that regulation that talks to mass carry is unfair to SABC. That's the first one. The second one talks to the whole issue of digital migration. The choices that have been made by government as to which option to go for, whether DTH or DTT, you find that some of these options are very costly to the SABC. There may be other avenues that are cheaper, efficient, and more reasonable for the SABC. For an example, if we were to go for DTH, which in this case it's satellite kind of a system, will give us more channels, efficient and more cheaper. But because of a government policy, we have to follow a particular route which is financially dire for the SABC. That's the second one. The third one talks to issues of sports rights. The sports rights, sports regulations talks about all free-to-air players having to carry sports of national importance. But strangely enough, other players don't even bother bidding for these rights because from a price perspective, it is too high and it is not commercially possible to commercialize these rights. So the sports rights put a burden on SABC that nobody is prepared to fund. When you look at our losses, I mean, the CEO and the CFO will talk about our losses. The unaudited financials for last financial year is sitting at about 483 million. About 410 of that 483 million is as a result of sports rights. So this talks to a policy and a regulation that is making it impossible for the SABC to be financially viable. The last component I want to touch on is TV licenses. I mean, for South Africans to be paying 72 cents a day for 19 radio stations, 5 TV channels, it's unsustainable. What can you buy for 72 cents these days? Considering that we are giving them 19 radio stations, 14 official languages, all covered, 5 TV channels. Of course, the SABC 404, which is the 24-hour news channel on DSTV, as well as the ENCO channel. So when you look at those regulations and policies, they have contributed significantly in getting SABC in a financially unattainable situation. That's the second element of our strategy. The third element of our strategy talks to what I call commercial and operational elements. This is about what are we going to do as the SABC to deal with revenue. So the executive have come up with about 15 initiatives to drive revenue growth. But at the same time, as you drive your revenue growth, you have to drive down your cost. So in the last financial year, we've saved almost R1 billion in cost. This talks to what we've been able to drive under that element. And that element really talks about commercially what you're going to do to turn around this business. And I've said there's 15 elements or initiatives. So for an example, retrenchment was just one of the elements. It's not the only one. I mean, if you look at, we haven't been able to retrench because we were stopped from retrenching. Last year when the board had resolved to retrench, we were stopped from retrenching. And up until now, we have not also received any money, but we're not allowed to do what we thought as a board was a sound and a reasonable thing to do. So in a nutshell, that's what our strategy. It covers those 3 elements: legacy and governance issues, policy and regulations. It also covers commercial and operational elements, which really looks at how do we make SABC efficient and able to compete in the space within we operate. That's what our strategy covers at a high level. But of course, when the CEO comes, he will also touch on the 6th element of our strategy, which is about, for an example, just to give you a sense of it, it's about financial sustainability. The second one talks to content and platforms, that we need to have compelling content that is available to all South Africans in different platforms. It talks to governance. It talks to partnerships, that we've got to leverage different partnerships for us to be able to deliver to South Africans. It also talks to HR issues, attracting the best talent, competent people who have the prerequisite skills and experience to help us with what we need to do. But the other key element talks to digital element of our strategy, because the future of broadcasting will require us to be leveraging or innovating in terms of technology and digital elements. So in a nutshell, those are the elements that sit in our strategy.
I do want to ask you some questions further on some of those aspects, but it may be that Ms. Norman is going to be asking you the questions I'm thinking of, so I'll allow her to proceed. But if she's going outside of those, then I will ask.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So then you have already said that then the board had approved this strategy.
Yes.
Now, what I'd like to know is, you have 4 board members resigning at the same time with immediate effect. How did that affect the functioning of the board?
It was devastating, and in a way, the impact of that, it had a very harmful impact in terms of the ability of the board to continue with the business of the day. Because all of a sudden we're incorrect. We couldn't have meetings. The work that we had started that was aimed at dealing with all these remedial action had to stop, because certain things could not be done without a board that could take decisions that are proper and binding. There was a 5-month gap where SABC did not really have a functioning board.
Well, before you talk about board members who resigned, let's go back to your board being stopped to do what it believed had to be done in order to execute its mandate and perform its duties. You have mentioned that you went to the portfolio committee and presented your turnaround strategy, which included cost-cutting measures, and which could lead to retrenchment, and you were stopped without an alternative being put on the table to say, if going that route is wrong, here is an alternative. Did I understand you correctly?
Correct, Chairperson.
And when you said that, you were saying that in regard to the portfolio committee, is that right? That the portfolio committee was not able to give you an alternative, and yet it was against the cost-cutting measures that could include retrenchment, or are you simply saying the stopping came from somewhere else, not the portfolio committee?
Chairperson, the stopping of the tenor of the retrenchment was done by the current minister, who basically had taken over as the new minister. We had a meeting with her as a board, and in that meeting she basically said the retrenchment should not continue. What she said at the time was that she needed more time to familiarize herself with the portfolio. And the response of the board was that we will be willing to look at the pace and the quantum of retrenchment, but until there is money, we can't stop, because from where we're sitting, we will be held liable as board directors. We have fiduciary duties to do what is responsible and right. To prove the point, and that the board was right in taking that stance, almost 23 months later, we still have not received any funding. The portfolio
and how
committee...
are you supposed to operate?
It becomes very hard, even for us as a board and the executives that we've been able to attract to come work for the SABC, if the support that is necessary for them to implement the turnaround strategy is not given. You would have seen from the letter that one of the board members, Mr. Makhathini, resigned specifically because of that there is no resources that are being given for us to be able to fund what needs to be done. So it becomes impossible and really demoralizing for us as a board and the executive.
Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Well,
okay.
I guess I will hear more about various aspects. But it's a matter that I'm quite interested in because, as you may be aware, in connection with the evidence that has been given in this commission in relation to what has happened in various SOEs over a certain period, there has been a view that certain board members or certain boards didn't do their job the way they should have done it, and that they may have acted corruptly, that they may have, or some of the members of certain boards may have been, for lack of a better word, may have been captured, may have been advancing agendas other than the agenda of the best interests of the SOE concerned. And there has been evidence by some witnesses who have said part of what has happened over the past few years has been that if in a particular SOE you have executive managers or board members who want to do the right thing, they are victimized, they are suspended, they are transferred. All steps are taken to drive them out of the SOE or the board, and other people are put in who later on turn out to have all kinds of allegations of corruption against them and interference. That's just, speaking generally, part of the evidence that I've heard. So the question that may arise in relation to what you have told me is whether we may have a situation where at SABC had found a board that wanted to do the right thing and look after the interests of the SABC, and may have done a lot of work in good faith to try and make sure that they make a difference in an institution that was going down. But when they put on the table solutions that politicians might not have liked, maybe because there were elections coming, those politicians stopped them. Was that improper interference in the performance of the duties of a board that was trying to solve a problem, trying to do their job? Or was that not an improper interference? Was it a legitimate intervention? So there is that question that I think I will have to look at. But it becomes more important because you may not, in a number of cases that I've had relating to SOEs, the criticism would be leveled maybe at the government and maybe at people who are members of the ruling party. But from what you have said, I think you have said that opposition parties were also saying, no, you can't retrench, don't retrench. So that may raise the question whether part of the problem we have in South Africa is that people that occupy certain positions who are supposed to stand for what is right will not stand for what is right for political reasons, for expedience, or what was the position? To what extent, in other words, was the SABC board stopped from doing what was commercially correct just because of considerations maybe that should not have come into the picture? Maybe they should have, maybe they shouldn't have, I don't know, but that's one of the things that I think is important for me to understand. And maybe you might be able to speak on it up to a certain point, but other witnesses will take it further. But I thought I must just mention that because I'm interested in knowing whether that wasn't an improper interference with the board performing its duties.
Thank you, Chairperson. I must say that my understanding of how a capture has materialized or happened in most of these SOEs, certainly credible, competent, experienced people of integrity gets victimized, they get pushed out and frustrated. And they get frustrated in a number of ways, to a point where you have to ask yourself, why must I continue doing this? If one, I'm not getting the support that I think I should be getting, but also getting to a point where they attack you personally and put your life at risk just for trying to do what is right. So I can say that what resulted to this commission being doing with the work that it's doing, it's still a reality for us. We're still living under those circumstances where you worry about your safety for just trying to do what is right. And what is the most frustrating things at times, they will cover some of these things as transformation. They will label you as somebody who's against transformation when they hide in corruption under transformation. Or they will label you as somebody who's gender insensitive just because they want to cover certain things using gender and transformation. And when you look at what the public protector found about purging of competent, experienced people, and those people being replaced by people who were not that qualified and without necessarily following processes, what happened in that 2014 is still happening today. So that interference was improper in a sense that the strategy of the organization, SABC in this case, is drafted by the executive team, approved by the board. Only the board can approve the strategy, and the executive then must implement that strategy. Nobody else, not the minister, not parliament, can come and say this strategy is not right. We'll take input, as we've always said, but the approval sits with the board. So stopping the implementation of the strategy without providing sound alternatives, it's improper. And why I say there is no alternative given, we're like 24 months down the line. Our financial situation has worsened. We've had instances where we had diesel spillage, our employees ended up in hospital because we haven't been able to maintain our buildings. We haven't been able to invest in content. We haven't even been able to pay people who supply us with content. We owe almost 2 billion rand. And that talks to the content providers, signal distribution costs, and so forth. So it's okay to give input and alternative, but you can't just stop something without providing an alternative.
Well, maybe I could just mention this in this context. I had evidence earlier this year relating to Denel, in terms of what happened to Denel. The evidence hasn't been completed, and there will be another phase. But one of the witnesses, I think, was the chairperson of a certain board of Denel. And the evidence seemed to suggest that that board had done a very good job. But she said it was replaced, and after it was replaced, certain things happened. And I will hear the rest of the evidence. So I'm just linking what I'm talking about to say, here is an example where a board was said to have been doing quite well. I think the minister who was responsible for Denel, I think there was correspondence which suggested that the minister was also had indicated that the board had done very well, and so on. So it's important to examine how the boards operate, but also to see whether when they try to do their job, there is improper interference, whether that happened many years ago under another president, and whether it happens now under a new president. We've got to look at everything. We're not going to look at one and not the other. We must look at everything. And because in the end, we must be able to say, yes, the following things are improper interference. They should not happen. In order for the board to operate properly, these are the things that must happen. Because in the meantime, I'm sure that a lot of criticism is directed at the board in the public domain.
That's correct.
Yes, thank you. You might or might not wish to add anything. Yeah, okay. Continue, Ms. Norman.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Maybe let's skip then and deal with the matters that the Chair has just raised with you. Those are the matters that we're going to deal with later, but let's deal with them. The issue of funding. In paragraph 17, you deal with the fact that the SABC applied for government funding. So then there's a distinction, am I correct, between paragraph 17 and what you deal with in paragraph 20, where you deal with the bailout, government guarantee, and also you deal in paragraph 17 with government funding. Let's talk about the government funding that you applied for, that is the SABC applied for in 2017. All right?
I'm sorry, Ms. Norman. I may have interrupted your plan. At a certain stage, you were dealing with the reasons given by
the various...
the last, given in the last letter of resignation, and you had said you would go backwards.
Oh, yes, Chair.
So I don't know whether you still want to finish that or whether you...
Or maybe...
I'm just feeling guilty that I may have interrupted your
no,
plan.
No, not at all, Chair. We'll go
Yes.
back to them.
Okay,
But this will link in nicely with what you've just raised.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Could you then tell the Chair about this application that that was made by the SABC to government in 2017? What was this for?
Thank you, Chairperson. After the work that was done by the Parliament Ad Hoc Committee, following up on the 2014 report that was done or issued by the Public Protector, it became clear that SABC was in dire financial need. And what then happened at the time, the interim board came in February 2017, and around about June, they put their first government guarantee application. It was a government guarantee application to government. And that basically didn't materialize. And in 2017, November, another application went in by the permanent board that I'm still part of. And that was really to help SABC out of the situation that we face with. I've already touched on the inability of the SABC to honor their monthly obligation to the suppliers. I've touched on lack of funds to maintain our broadcasting infrastructure. I've also touched on the SABC inability to invest in content. In broadcasting, you need to invest between 24 months to 36 months in advance for you to be able to recoup or get some revenue coming out of the advertising. So that application went specifically for that. But I must also distinguish that in terms of what we get from government, SABC has got a number of streams in terms of revenue. 85% of our revenue is commercial revenues. So which means we have to go out there, compete with other players for advertising revenues. Like any other broadcasting, that's what we have to do, 85%. About 14% of our revenue comes from TV licenses. That's why I touched on the importance of re-looking at the amount people pay towards TV licenses. But government give us 3%. So if you look in the last financial year, 3% maybe amounts to about 200 million. But if you look at the mandate, the public mandate that SABC has to carry runs over 3 billion. That's the situation we face with. And in paragraph 20, I'm referring to that funding that has not yet come. It is the reason why Makhathini resigned at the time when he resigned in December. It is the same reason we're sitting here today. We still don't have the funding.
Well, Mr. Makhathini, you placed before Parliament and therefore before the nation the board's turnaround strategy, by which you were saying, this is how we think the situation at the SABC can be turned around. All right? And with regard to your cost-cutting measures, in particular retrenchment, you have stopped. You have not been given funding that you have just talked about. Has anybody, has government or anybody put before you an alternative plan? What, is it 2 years after you put your turnaround strategy before Parliament? Has anybody said, we don't agree with your turnaround strategy, here is a better one?
Chairperson, what has happened, the shareholder, the minister, basically offered services of an entity called GTEC, which is a government entity that assists with strategic projects. So that entity was meant to come in and help us enhance our strategy, which we welcome. I mean, any input can help. So that team came in, and they're due to present their final version of their strategy, I think next week, to the executive team. But when you look at what they've come up with, they haven't come up with anything new. They have actually, to a certain extent, a greater extent, endorsed what the board had put in place. To prove to you that that strategy that was put by the executive team at the time, the reason why we've kept SABC going, afloat, for almost 2 years, without any funding, it's because of that turnaround strategy that we put together. It's because of the caliber of the executives that we've been able to attract. It's because of the commitment of some of our clients who continue to invest with SABC, run their ads on SABC platform. It's also because of our employees who, in spite of the danger they face when they go to our buildings that are falling apart, continue to come to work and deliver on their mandate and what is expected of them, in spite of the situation we face with. So, in essence, we have not been given anything other than the support we got from GTEC, but of course, there are engagements. But at some point, engagement,
they must produce
something.
Results, yeah, and they haven't.
And they haven't.
Thank you, Chair. The Minister and Minister of Finance recently was on television and announcing the bailouts to the various SOEs, ESCOM and to the SABC. And my recollection is that a 3.2 billion was going to be offered to the SABC, but the minister made it very clear that that was going to come with conditions. Now the question is, you may not be getting the funding because you have not met the conditions that the minister or National Treasury has put up. What is your response to that?
We actually agree with the minister that any funding must come with conditions. It is the right thing to do because people must be held accountable. You can't just give money and not hold people accountable. So that bailout of 3.2 billion came with 11 conditions. And as the SABC, we've met those conditions or substantially completely met those conditions because it's about 11 of them. And some of those conditions are very interesting. One of the conditions, for example, says, what are the reasons why the previous turnaround strategy were not successful? Before our time. That was before this board. This was before the executives that we have. Because we've inherited a broken organization. I mean, we're not there. Government was there. To put that as a condition, to release the 3.2 billion to an organization and to a team that is prepared to do the right work, leaves a lot, to question. But in essence, we've met all the conditions. In areas where there is maybe issues, I'm sure it's because it is not possible to fully meet some of the things now. To give you an example, if somebody says, give me a sense of your non-core assets, all right? Now, before you say that radio station is not profitable, as a public broadcaster, you can't just decommission or sell that or put it as non-core without understanding what will be the impact of that decision on you fulfilling your public mandate. Because it may not be making money, but it may be helping us meet our public mandate. So you've got to evaluate these assets and evaluate the impact of selling them if you want to sell them. But you can't just wake up and sell things without assessing the impact. Part of the problem SABC find itself in, they went into deals without evaluating their assets to know what to demand when they get to a negotiation table. We're not going to do that. We'll do what is necessary, and we'll adhere to the Public Management Finance Act, and we'll adhere to that. And anybody who expects us to do stuff without complying with the prescripts of the law, we're not going to do it.
And now, these conditions, I would imagine, how are you supposed to update National Treasury as you meet them? Or were you just simply going to report to National Treasury that you put up 11 conditions and we have complied with 6, or we are still complying with 7? How were you supposed to respond to your compliance in terms of those conditions?
So basically they put the conditions to us. We then, in formal, we wrote to them presenting what they needed for us to comply. But also we've had meetings between the executive and National Treasury to align on it. Even on the letter that was sent to us, we have respectfully responded to that letter and said maybe the ministers were not given the information that we shared with them. Because the truth of the matter is we've fully complied. In areas where we haven't, we 90% there. So we've formally communicated, and not yesterday, months ago. I'll say 4-6 months ago, we started sort of like adhering and responding to those conditions.
Yes.
And maybe the last point that I need to mention, just to clarify things, the GTEC, which is an entity that is helping to boost our strategy, was actually brought in to help us. But if you look at some of the comments about where they're saying we haven't complied, they relied on the original version of the GTEC report, which has been improved. Because when you come into an organization, you'll do observations. Until you engage with people who work there, you may get certain things wrong. But once they sat with the team, they sat with the board where we gave input. So to rely on the original version, which was not checked and validated with the executive and the board, is wrong.
Maybe whilst we're still dealing with the finances, maybe it's important for me to take you back to paragraph 15 of your statement at page 6 of your statement. You deal with the dire situation in 2018-2019 financial year. And you say the corporation ended March 2019 with a cash balance of only 72 million. Now, what I'd like to know, one would have expected now, because part of, or if not most of the public protector's remedial action had been put in place, you would have put in place the ad hoc committee proposals or recommendations. What is it that really put the SABC in this situation now in this financial year? Leave the fact that you were asking for a guarantee. I'm just talking about the operations and the financial status at this point.
I indicated that in broadcasting, you need to invest 24 to 36 months in advance for you to be able to get the benefit of that investment. To put together a SOP takes months, a good one, that can end up performing like Uzalo, for an example. It takes months. So why we haven't been able to achieve much is because though we have a solid turnaround strategy, but that turnaround needs a financial injection. But I've also touched on the regulatory and policy issues that had crippled the SABC. Those regulations and policies have not been changed. Yes, ICASA has started a process to review those, but as we stand today, the status quo still stands. So it basically means that we are still affected heavily by those things. But the efforts around the public protector in terms of trying to recover the monies have not yielded much because we haven't recovered anything. Yes, we are in court. There's 7 cases that are already in litigation in court, but that process can take years before we can see money flowing back to the SABC. So where we are, we're suffering because of the poor decisions that were made at the time. The landscape that has not really changed with technology, innovation, and how our audiences consume our content. So that's why we're where we are. But in spite of that, the fact that we've kept the organization going, it tells you that the turnaround strategy has got potential to fix the SABC.
Is that where you talk about the 33 improvement in paragraph 16 of your statement?
Yes, Chairperson.
33%.
Yes.
And you deal with the figures there. Do you mind just putting those on record?
Okay. I mean, in me trying to explain and justify why we say that comprehensive turnaround strategy works, if you look at the numbers, the year 2018-2019, unaudited loss for the SABC is sitting at about 483 million. Losses have decreased over the past number of years from 1 billion rand in 2016-2017 down to 622 million in 2017-2018 and an unaudited loss of 483 million in 2018-2019. So that's an improvement of about 33%. It shows that if we had been given the money at the time we requested it, we could have got SABC to break even in 24 months.
Actually, the figures that we have just read do show that each year since the first financial year that you mentioned, the losses have been going down. There's been an improvement in the losses. Is that right?
It's right, Chairperson, yes.
Yes.
Thank
Actually, significant improvements.
That's correct,
Yeah.
Chairperson.
Thank you. In paragraph 19, you touch on something that the chairperson already asked you about when he was giving you the scenarios about whether certain executives or the certain boards do not do things according to certain wishes of maybe your political heads or something. But you deal with it, and you say the depoliticizing of the SABC is of paramount importance. Could you just explain to the chair what you mean by that? Now we're talking if you have examples of what you mean by that, you could just give those examples. But you want to understand why you believe that the SABC needs this most.
Thank you, Chairperson. If you look at what was surfaced as the outcome of the Public Protector report investigations and the ad hoc committee, it talks to a leadership that was not doing what was expected of them from a fiduciary duty perspective. It also talked to people who were not prepared to defend the independence of the SABC. Now, that comes from, in other instances, when you're going to give jobs and position to people who are not suited for those roles, those people get desperate to please. So, to depoliticize SABC meant one of the key things we had to do was to get the executive team that was competent, experienced, and at the same time having high levels of integrity so that they can do what is expected, regardless of the pushback or the challenges that they face. So doing that, it actually restores order and help us drive this rehabilitation and renewal of the SABC. It is very important because the independence of the SABC needs to be protected. And if you have wrong people in wrong jobs, you're not going to be able to do that. But secondly, part of the contracts that were in question did not make commercial sense for the SABC. Now, if as an executive you sign a contract that is not benefiting your entity, benefiting somebody else elsewhere, it raises a lot of questions. So we had to bring people who've got commercial and business acumen to make sure that they help the SABC get back on track.
So how do you balance the public mandate that the SABC has and the commercial interests? Because it also operates within that space as a commercial entity. So how do you balance the two? Because government is going to say, look, we want you to educate people. And you say, I want to educate people, but I want to make money. So how do you draw the line? Where do you draw the line when you have to discharge your mandate as a board?
There is an editorial policy currently is being reviewed that really guides the decisions at the SABC. And when it comes to news and editorial decisions, that has got, it's somehow protected from the commercial interest. It is important for the SABC to make money, like I indicated, that 85% of our revenue come from commercial activities. But that does not mean that we then compromise our independence because we are getting the support from private or from commercial activities.
Yes. Thank you. Chair, if you...
Sorry, can I go back to what we were talking about under paragraph 16? The decrease in the losses made by the SABC, or the improvement in the losses that were made by the SABC as testified to by you a few minutes ago in relation to paragraph 16, were those improvements in the losses as a result of the implementation of the turnaround strategy that we have talked about?
Thank you, Chairperson. Certainly, it is the outcome or the result of the turnaround strategy. Because before the turnaround strategy was in place, it was downhill for the SABC.
Yes. So the strategy, turnaround strategy that you put in place has been showing positive results.
Certainly. We've saved almost R1 billion as a
Yes.
result of that turnaround strategy.
Yes.
We've been able to attract top talent to come work
Yes.
for the SABC because they
Yes.
feel that SABC is changing. I mean, if you look at the
Yes.
caliber of the executives that we've been able to attract,
Yes.
is testimony that the turnaround strategy is working. But the fact that we delivered the election in this dire financial situation, that was rated the best coverage ever, should give South Africans confidence that we are turning around the SABC.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And then, maybe, Chair, I might just finish up with the letters before I forget. Sorry.
Yes, do that, yeah.
So can you just go back? We were still dealing with and I had asked you, and you explained what you think Mr. Naidu meant in his letter about the failure to understand the difference between corporate independence and accountability. Now, he also identifies the fact that the SABC it does need funding, doesn't he? He does that, sorry. I'll tell you now. Yes, in the third paragraph. He also alludes to the fact that the SABC also needed funds. He says, the SABC has a pressing issue of lack of funds, which requires immediate attention.
Yes,
see that?
it did.
He did.
Yes.
So you would find that then that also talks to what Mr. Matata Sedu had referred to in his letter. Then let's just deal with the letter of Mr. John Matheson. Okay?
I'm sorry, before you go to that one, on this one from Mr. Krish Naidu, I get the impression, and you must tell me if I'm wrong, that he had a difference of opinion with the majority of the board on certain issues, and he talks about, he says the difference between corporate independence, accountability, and political interference. He seems to have taken a certain view, and maybe the majority of the board took a different view. Are you able to speak on this in terms of practical examples? And are they connected in any way, for example, with the issue of cost-cutting measures, or not really?
Thank you, Chairperson. I must indicate that all these resignations came immediately after the meeting we had with the minister, where we disagreed on the retrenchment element. So the majority of the board was of the view that the strategy has been approved by the board, has been shared and presented in Parliament, and the minister at that time actually gave input, and her input was incorporated. So all we needed to do now was to hold the executives, to implement the turnaround strategy. So some people felt that we were supposed to stop the retrenchment without necessarily having anything tangible. So that's where the difference of opinion is. But also the issue around, if you look at the Matujana judgment, it clearly outlines what is the role of the board and what is the role of the minister. And people seem to struggle to get to terms and to accept that SABC is independent and the board of the SABC is in charge of the affairs of the SABC, not the minister. The minister, yes, through a shareholder compact, will hold us accountable on certain things. Are we meeting our targets and so forth? She's got enough in the shareholder compact to hold us accountable in terms of the performance of the board and the entity. But in terms of the decisions, that must be left with the board.
Is the position that Mr. Naidu felt that there was no political interference? Because he refers to political interference, he seems to say some members of the board don't understand political interference, accountability, and corporate independence. I'm trying to understand what the difficulty was. Was he thinking that the board was allowing the minister to interfere improperly? Was his view that the board maybe was thinking the minister is interfering improperly when actually she was not interfering improperly? Are you able to recall exactly where the differences were between him and the board?
Chairperson, beyond what is on the letter, it gets harder for me to speculate what he was thinking.
Okay.
But if I was to look at what was happening at the time,
Yes.
a board had taken a resolution,
Yes.
and which was supported by the majority of the board,
Yes.
and a minority within the board
Yes.
felt that we should just fall over and
Yes.
do whatever that was required of us.
Okay.
So that's the only way I could basically
Yes.
frame my understanding of the letter. But as to what was going on in his mind,
Yes, yes.
I wouldn't be able to speculate on that.
Yes, and maybe because after he resigned, there was no interaction.
There was no interaction.
Yes.
But again, when you look at his letter, he talks about an interim structure, which meant that there was a view that maybe the board that is in place was meant to vacate office, and then an interim structure should come in, because that's what is in his letter. When he says he doesn't want to delay the installation of an interim structure that can deal with the affairs. Now, when the 4 members resigned, it put a amount of pressure on the 4 that remained, because if we had resigned, that was going to make way for an interim board.
Yes.
But we felt that we had done nothing wrong.
Yes.
We had delivered on what is expected of us,
Yes.
and we were prepared to stand and fight and defend the independence of the SABC, which
Yes.
then made it impossible to bring an interim board, because you can't bring an interim board without doing an inquiry, which is what
Yes.
was done by the ad hoc committee.
Yes, yes. But you see, all of these things become quite important for this commission, because certainly in regard to other SOEs or government institutions, there certainly has been complaints that sometimes certain structures were weakened to such extent, were weakened in a way that sought to push them out so that other people would be put in who would then behave in a different way. So it becomes very important to understand all of those things, because also some people might feel, hey, if I'm not wanted, I must just leave. But by doing that, you might be allowing somebody who might have improper motives and objectives to then bring in somebody who is going to put up no resistance when they should put up resistance. So it becomes very important to understand all of those things. And sometimes you think that corporate governance requires that when people believe they've done nothing wrong, they should stand their ground and say, we see that we are being pushed out here and people think we are going to resign so that other people can be put in. If we think we've done nothing wrong, we're not going anywhere. And if somebody has power to fire us, let them fire us. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. And maybe just one other aspect linked to what the Chair has asked about, what Mr. Naidu was saying. Was there, in fact, at this point, a breakdown in the relationship between the board and the minister?
It was a very strange point to put in the letter, because the minister just came in. She had just been appointed. And this was the very first meeting with the board. So it's just that there was this contentious issue around Section 189, but I'm not of the view that the relationship was broken, because it was the very first meeting that we had with her.
Okay. All right, thank you. And then let us then go to Mr. Makhathi's letter. Which one follows, Mr. Naidu? Yes, it is Mr. Makhathi's at page 3. I think it is important, linked to the matters that the Chair had put to you, that you have somebody who was part of the interim board and now he also became part of the permanent board. But what he says there about rooting out corrupt practices and reversing fraudulent activities and he then commends both the interim and the permanent board. Are these matters that Mr. Makhathini speaks to here, are these some of the matters that when you are asking for a bailout from National Treasury, the Minister of Finance would consider? That is what you've done about the corporation, whether because you are there now, corruption is simply escalated, or you have actually tried to root out corruption. Are these some of the considerations?
Chairperson, that's correct. One of the conditions is how far have you gone in implementing the corrective measures coming out of the public protector? And we've met that condition. I mean, you would have seen that we are tackling the irregular appointments. We are holding people accountable. There's been people that have been put through independent disciplinary processes. We are hard at work, and we are actually doing very well. Even the government, both ministers, agrees that in that area we've done exceptionally well.
Yes. Thank you. And then we have then the last letter, because we don't have the one of Ms. Kweyama. Then we have at page 2, that one of Mr. John Mattison. One of the things that he raises is that he doesn't agree with the current board's direction, and in particular its failure to appreciate the oversight role of Parliament and its committees. The dissatisfaction of oversight committees was apparent in 3 successive hearings and reached across all political parties. So what was he talking about here? Was he still referring to the issue of retrenchments, or were there other areas that he felt that the board's direction was not consistent with what he believed in?
Thank you, Chairperson. The truth of the matter is, if you look at how our engagement with the Portfolio Committee and SCOPA, the only issue that they were always picking on was retrenchment. Why are you retrenching? There's never been a substantial input or alternative that was ever given other than them expressing concern about retrenchments while South Africa has got high levels of unemployment. So him talking about us having challenges, it was specifically about that. And he was of the view, rather, also, that we should suspend retrenchment. And the position of the board was, until we are given money, we are prepared to review the pace and the quantum of retrenchment. But to just say you can't retrench and no money given, no alternative given, it would have been irresponsible for the board to accept that.
I may have misunderstood you, but I think you must have intended to say the board's position was, as long as we don't have money, unfortunately, this is one of the cost-cutting measures that we'll have to do, namely retrenchment. But if we are given money, then we can look at the situation. Am I right?
Thank you, Chairperson. Cost-cutting, the position of the board was exactly was that we were going to review the pace and the quantum.
Yes.
You may have maybe in your initial projections put about, let's say, 900 employees.
Yes.
But when there is money given and you can drive efficiencies in other areas, you can then maybe reduce that to like maybe 700. But to just take it off the table completely, when it's about 45% of your expenditure, and you're not able to identify another lever where you're going to reduce costs, because our main cost drivers is staff payroll, it's signal distribution or connectivity cost, it's also sport rights, which falls under content. So you can never turn around the finances of the SABC without tackling those 3 areas.
So every month, as you paid salaries, there would be this 45% that goes to salaries. And your turnaround strategy contemplated that the numbers of staff had to be reduced if there was, they had to be reduced, I think that's what you say. And by how much they would have to be reduced could be affected by whether or not you were going to get funding and how much funding you were going to get. But there was no doubt in the minds of the board that retrenchments had to happen?
I may not have the numbers details here,
Yes.
but there's a number of things that needed to be done around our staff mix.
Yes.
In terms of, for example, freelancers versus permanent staff, but also looking at where we're going as the SABC, what skills do we need, but also there were a number of irregular appointments and a lot of things that needed to be looked at and reviewed. Even our operational model as the SABC needed to be relooked because we are operating in a digital space where things have changed and competition also is intensifying. And like I indicated, that if you look at how people consume content, it has changed. So do we still need everything that we have now in its current form or shape? All those things were being reviewed, and it's what the executive team was looking at. But certainly, without reducing your cost, you can never turn around the SABC because you're not going to be able to grow your revenue in this competitive space without tackling your cost elements.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And then he says in the last sentence, which you've already read into the record, that his endeavors to persuade the board to change its course, including the suspension of retrenchments, have not been accepted. So I would take it that you have one person who's not happy with the strategy or with the way you're going, but the majority of the board would have approved it. And then he decided that, look, if it cannot be done as he's suggesting, then he would rather leave. Was that the impression you got?
Certainly. I mean, a board of about 15 people, if you have 14 people agreeing and one person disagreeing, the majority of the board agrees with the strategy and we move forward.
Yes, thank you. Then, before we go to some paragraphs of your statement, I would like us to just finish with all the media documents which we've placed before the Chair. Shall we now go to Exhibit CC 23, I beg your pardon, I have not dealt with Exhibit CC 23A. May I refer you, do you have that?
Exhibit CC 23.
23A.
I've got it.
You have it, okay, thank you. Then, the first item on the index, which goes to page 2 of that document, deals with sports broadcasting rights row still unresolved. We're not going to read these letters, but you can just, because I know that the CEO is going to talk to them. He has dealt with it in his supplementary statement. But just roughly, you have already indicated to the Chair that sports rights are expensive, but this row that they're referring to here, what are they talking about?
So,
just high level overview of what this was all about. Mr. Mchako is going to deal with it in detail. Yeah.
maybe just high level, thank you, Chairperson. One of the key things, there were a number of contracts that SABC had entered into that were not financially or commercially making sense for the SABC. Sports rights, for example, sports rights prices had become so high, and our ability to commercialize those rights was not in line with what we were paying for these rights. So we as a board took a position, as a majority of the board, let me emphasize that we will no longer sign any contract that does not make commercial sense for the SABC, regardless of what that contract is about. And sport fell into that basket. And we've had a number of engagement, and we've agreed now, for an example, with SuperSport and PSL on the rights, where they managed to understand our position, and we had to understand also their position, and got to a form of an agreement that will result to SABC making some money from it. Because if you look at the sports rights alone, in the last 5 years, SABC has lost about 2.3 billion rands as a result of sports rights. I spoke to you about the financials for the last financial year of about 483. About 410 million of that 483 loss is due to sports.
Yes. And then I would like to just highlight...
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Is that because, I mean, you referred earlier on to some contracts in which concluded by SABC and other entities that did not make commercial sense. Is this one of them where there's such a loss that happened over that period? Is it because the agreements that SABC had got into didn't make commercial sense in your view?
Certainly, Chairperson. Some of these are part of those contracts that needed to be reviewed, because if you're paying, let's say, 20 million rand for something and you're only making 5 million rands,
yes,
it will be irresponsible for any board director to go in knowing that they're going to have such a significant loss. But also to expect the SABC to carry this alone without a financial injection, it also becomes unsustainable for us.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. And then if I may just take you to page 6 of that bundle, which is Exhibit CC23A. So this is some of the correspondence that happened over the weekend. It talks to the bailout, am I right?
Yes, Chairperson, yes.
Yes. And then it says, SABC top brass threatened to quit over board meddling. Could you just explain to the Chair who is the top brass and why was there a threat to quit? Because your board is meddling into the affairs of the executives.
The top brass in this case refers to the group CEO, CFO, and the COO. And the challenge there's been some issues that the executive raised with the board in terms of minority of the board doing things that makes it impossible for the executive team to do their work, which when you look at the instances given, it talks to some level of interference, second-guessing the executives, and creating an environment that is not conducive for the executive to do their work. But as a board, we are dealing with that matter. It's been brought to the attention of the board, and as a board, we are tackling that issue.
Yes. When you say minority members of the board, how many members are we talking about?
The board is made up of 12 non-execs and then 3 executive directors. So when the 3 executives are complaining about the board, they will be referring to the non-exec, which is the 12. So out of the 12, you will have a minority. A minority for me will be any number less than 3, or 3 going down if you have a total of 12 people.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So which means where we are, the board is fully functional and still able to do its work. But of course, because boards are made up of people from different backgrounds and who approach things differently. And for every new team or group of people, when they meet for the first time, there will be teething issues. What I normally say is that as long as everybody is guided by the prescripts of the law, one, but secondly guided by what is at the best interest of the entity that they are part of, not pushing their personal interests that have got nothing to do with the SABC, but also allowing the executive space to do their work. Nobody should block the executive from driving consequence management, from implementing the turnaround strategy and so forth. So that's the stance.
Yes. And then there you quoted, I'm not sure whether it's you who's quoted, you'll tell me, in this paragraph 8, it starts with, it is the SABC board's understanding. Could you just read that into the record?
This pertains to the bailout. Our response goes like this. It is the SABC's board's understanding that the public broadcaster has either complied or substantially complied with each precondition, as demonstrated by the substantive documentation supplied over a period of 8 months. In the letter to the ministers, the board attached detail on the SABC's compliance with each condition and has asked for an urgent engagement to discuss the matter. The board had informed the minister that as a result of the current status of the SABC funding request, the board was left with no option but to implement the requirement of the Companies Act, taking into account the severe implications on the director's liabilities.
And the last one? Okay.
The board had assured the minister of its commitment to serving the corporation in the public interest. To this end, the board will continue to work with the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies and the National Treasury
Yes. And then, if I may just take you, I just want to highlight those particular articles which are relevant to your evidence. You have already spoken or testified to the issue of TV licenses. And this is dealt with at page 17 of this pack. And then there is in fact, how it's captured in the index, it says SABC wants to increase TV licenses, but DA says no way. The opposition says the public broadcaster needs to find another way to turn around. So that was part. Did this issue of increasing TV licenses, did it also form part of your turnaround strategy?
Yes, it is one of the things that we had highlighted.
Yes, so this is one of the things that would have been opposed to by some political parties, or all.
That's correct, Chairperson.
Yes. And then at page, this is linked to the first one. At page 22, multi-choice signs deal with SABC for Premier Soccer League rights. And this is what you have already testified to, that you'd reach agreement. Is that what you're talking about there?
That's correct, Chairperson.
Yes, thank you. That's at page 22. And there's an article that says SABC lets down the poor at page 23. Could you just read what this is a Mr. Vukile Maki from Danzani, what his complaint was about there, because it talks to the issue of sports rights and how the public views it, or at least one member of the public who has actually documented it. Yes.
Okay, it says, I was totally flabbergasted at the way SAFA, the PSL and the SABC have taken people for granted. League games started a few weeks back, yet there was no agreement about which matches will be publicly screened. The blackout of soccer matches was a terrible blow for the football lovers and a shameful way to treat the beautiful game. Not showing the game was like showing the middle finger to the public and soccer fans. This shows how greedy the leaders of these organizations are. They prefer to show lots of matches on the pay channel, rather, than letting the have-nots watch. Rugby fans also have to wait until matches are finished on the pay channel. SABC shows them by the time you already know the score. Vukile Maki.
Yes. So to the members of the public, how do you explain this? How would you explain this? Because people, they have SABC 1, 2, 3. You've mentioned the sports rights that SABC doesn't have. But to a lay person, how would you then explain why is it that you are not able to show these important games to the public?
Thank you, Chairperson. When it gets to sports regulations, it says the free-to-air players must carry sports of national importance. But what is interesting is that other players like your e-media don't even bother to bid for these sports rights because they know the pricing is not making commercial sense. And then the SABC, because we are a public broadcaster, we are then expected to carry these games at huge cost for us. It would have been ideal if we were getting some support funding that actually makes it possible for us to carry these games while at the same time being financially viable. Because we have to pay millions and millions of rents and run at huge losses, which the very same South Africans are going to complain and say, why is this SABC not turning around? Why are the losses at SABC so high? Part of the things that drives those losses is because of the very same issues around content that is very, very expensive for us. But also, the content that becomes harder for us to commercialize. When I talk about commercialization of content, it's okay if I'm going to pay 20 million and then sell advertising space to advertisers and make, let's say, 30 million. So then I have a 10 million rand profit. But from where we are, we have to incur huge costs acquiring the rights. We have to incur cost of production, cost of on-air talent. And when you add all of those together, it makes SABC impossible for the SABC to be financially viable. So South Africans need to understand that in as much as we are committed to fulfilling our public mandate, it comes at a cost. And we need all players to play their part. The Department of Sports must play their part, and other players must play their part. It can't be the SABC only burden to carry these.
And maybe lastly, I would like to take you to page 8, which is headed, oh sorry, this is the, I'll take it up with your head of news. Your head of news is going to testify. This deals with head of news. Sorry, Chair. I think we've dealt with most of the things that would warrant your attention from that report. And then lastly, Chair, if I may just refer the witness to Exhibit CC23C. You've already dealt with that.
Yes.
Yes, it deals with the SABC threatening to quit over board meddling. Remember that? You've already touched upon that. And then the next page, at page, sorry, this is not numbered. It will be page 4. I'm sorry, it's not numbered. It will be attended to. Chair, mine is not numbered. Page 4, it says SABC board response to Sunday Times story. That is your response then to that article. Is that correct?
It's correct, Chairperson.
Yes. And I think it's important, this is something that you said you wanted to place on record. You've already mentioned how skilled your executives are. Maybe you want to just read into the record what your response to that statement was.
Thank you, Chairperson. As the SABC board, we decided to respond to the Sunday Times story. SABC brass threatened to quit over board mingling. The SABC board has reaffirmed its utmost support and respect for the SABC executive directors who have done a sterling job thus far in very difficult circumstances. The board will not be drawn into discussing internal board matters and alleged differences between board members. The board comprises of persons chosen through a public process who have a range of skills and experience and who will continue to be critically engaged in their duties and responsibilities. It is well known that the SABC faces huge historical challenges which the board is committed to turning around. This was reported in Parliament last week, Wednesday. The SABC board denies that there is a disagreement among board directors about meeting the preconditions set by government for providing the 3.2 billion bailout. At a meeting of the SABC board on the 30th of August 2019, it was unanimously agreed to write to the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Communication and Digital Technologies, respectfully disagreeing with the view that the SABC had not met the Treasury preconditions for funding. In the letter to the ministers, the board expressed its concerns with the content of a letter from the two ministers received on the 27th of August 2019 and believe that the ministers have not been fully briefed on the information provided by the SABC thus far. It is the SABC's board understanding that the public broadcaster has either complied or substantially complied with each precondition, as demonstrated by the substantive documentation supplied over a period of 8 months. In the letter to the ministers, the board attached details on the SABC's compliance with each condition and has asked for an urgent engagement to discuss the matter. The SABC, the board has informed the minister that as a result of the current status of the SABC's funding request, the board is left with no option but to implement the requirement of the Companies Act, taking into account the severe implications on directors' liability. The board has assured the ministers of its commitment to serving the corporation in the public interest. To this end, the board will continue to work with the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies and the National Treasury. Issued by the chairperson of the board on behalf of the board.
Yes, thank you. There's two reports which we have not mentioned, which you testify, I beg your pardon, you have not testified to just yet. Those are dealt with at page 22, at paragraph 22, I beg your pardon, page 7 of your statement, where then as part of the cleaning up of the SABC.
I'm sorry, page?
Page 7, Chair, paragraph
7.
22.
Okay.
Yes. The SABC commissioned 2 other inquiries. Could you just talk to those inquiries, please?
Coming out of the work that was done by the Public Protector and the ad hoc committee specifically, there were a number of complaints that were raised around issues of harassment and political interference with the editorial decisions of the SABC. So in our effort in implementing this remedial action, like I've said, that we are committed in doing that, we commissioned 2 commissions, one to look into the harassment issues and the other one to look at political interference. Both commissions have concluded. We are almost done with the phase 1 of the implementing the recommendation of the harassment one. The one on political interference was just released a few weeks ago. The recommendations coming out of that will be incorporated or considered as we update our editorial policy, and then we'll be able to make sure that we strengthen our governance to ensure our editorial independence and protecting the editorial decisions.
Yes. When you're talking harassment, you mean sexual harassment?
I mean sexual harassment, yes.
Yes. And then the other report that dealt with interference in editorial independence, that's the one that by Mr. Joel Nong Tlolwe, is that correct?
That's correct, Chairperson.
Yes. Chair, that report is contained in Exhibit 6019, and it has 4 volumes, 6019A to D. But Mr. Tlolwe is going to testify to it.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. And then you then in paragraph 23 say that most of the matters, in the details, you leave them up to the executives which are lined up to testify after you.
That's correct, Chairperson.
Yes, thank you. And then lastly, then according to the correspondence that you've given to the media houses, like the statement that you've just read out about either the SABC complying fully or substantially with the conditions, what could be the reason for this bailout not forthcoming? It's been how many, you said 18 months now?
It's almost 24 months if you consider the period under the interim board, because the interim board put the first application in 2017 June.
Yes. So what could be the reason? I don't want you to speculate, but is it something that you can talk to, or you feel that you don't want to even speculate?
To be honest, because we're given 11 conditions and we've complied with all of them, and the results are showing that the business is turning around, you could see that even our losses are decreasing. We've reduced it by 33%. I'm not sure what would be any other reasonable reason for not assisting the SABC, considering what the team has been able to deliver.
Do you have to communicate with the Minister of Communications, and she in turn has to communicate with the Minister of Finance, or does SABC, or is SABC able to approach National Treasury directly and find out what's holding things back?
Thank you, Chairperson. The protocols for communication is that SABC submit anything that they need to submit to the Department of Communication, and then Communication Department then engages with the Minister of Finance. And I think that's why in our response we're respectfully saying maybe the ministers have not been appraised or given sight of what we have submitted, because in the last 8 months, we've submitted substantive documentation to comply with those conditions.
And you have not been told by the Minister of Communications why there's a delay in the decision being taken with regard to granting SABC what is referred to as the bailout, or either the funding that it requires or the portion that falls within the budget of government. In other words, if you have asked for 100%, they must be able to say, we can't give you anything for reason A, B, C, D, or we can only give you 50%. And these are the reasons why we can't give you the other 50%. Have they not come back to you, the Minister of Communications, to tell you whether a decision has been taken one way or another as to what, if anything, SABC will be given.
Thank you, Chairperson, for asking the question. Reasonable, logical, that's what you will expect, that if I was given 11 conditions, and let's say, for argument's sake, I've met 50% of those, I should then be given 50% of the funding. Now, there's 11 conditions. We are of the view, like I've read the statement, that we've substantially or met these conditions. We haven't been given a cent of the 3.2 billion rands. But there are even instances where they themselves admit that we've met a condition around, for example, consequence management. So where is the money that talks to that? So to hold back the entire amount, when you know that the organization is bleeding, people's lives are at risk, businesses are being shut because the fact that we can't pay those suppliers, it means some of these businesses are shutting down. Our employees are in and out of hospital because of us not being able to maintain and comply with health and safety standards. It leaves a lot of confusion.
I mean, you talk about businesses that are being shut. I mean, I think for some years now, I think government has been talking the language that small businesses must be paid within 30 days and all of that. In your situation, there must be a lot of small businesses that you are not able to pay for quite some time because there's simply no money.
That's correct, Chairperson. Thank you. The only thing we are able to pay religiously every month is our staff. Our
Yes.
salary bill is sitting at about 260 million rands.
Yes.
After paying that, there is nothing left.
But what it means, it goes back to the point or part of the point you have just made. What it means is that if there are lots of, for example, small businesses, suppliers that the SAB relies on, they are not being paid, and those business people who are supposed to help the economy grow, they have to close down their businesses because they are not being paid for months and months and months on end. That's what it means, is that
That's
right?
what it means, Chairperson.
And-
SABC plays a critical role in the entire broadcasting industry.
Yes.
If SABC goes down, it's got a ripple effect in the entire industry.
You see, part of the, sometimes what is difficult to understand is when people who are appointed to make decisions, whose job is to make decisions, don't make decisions for a long time. I mean, you have got to make a decision, whether people criticize you and say it's a wrong decision or not. If your job is to make a decision, you must make the decision, one way or another. People must know where they stand, and you must provide your reasons. There's a time to gather information that you need in order to make your decision one way or another. But for a situation to be allowed to develop where, an important public institution waits for a long, long time without decisions being made, and in the meantime, small businesses get really affected in a very bad way. It's something that should be avoided. And all one would expect is that at least decisions must be taken. If the decision is that, look, we can't give you the money, or we can only give you so much, let the decision be taken so that everybody knows, okay, that's the decision. How do we live with it? How do we plan our operations appropriately? So hopefully those decisions will be taken soon. Yes.
Thank you.
Do you have any, or did you want to say something, or
No,
not really?
I fully agree with you, Chairperson, that leadership is about making decisions.
Yes. I mean, sometimes it's just worse that you are put in a leadership position, but you can't make decisions. Sometimes you feel it's better to have somebody who will make a bad decision, then everybody knows where they stand. Okay, Ms. Norman.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, that is the evidence from
Yes.
this witness. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Makhathini, for coming to share with the Commission what you know is happening in regard to the SABC. If a need arises, we will ask you to come back, but for now, you are excused.
Thank you for the opportunity, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Chair, I was going to suggest that we adjourn today.
Yes.
Maybe we could start early tomorrow. But we're not particularly worried, Chair. I think we've faced
On the
our
spacing of-
witnesses
Yes.
quite fairly. I think we'll be able, at least those that
Yes.
are lined up for the week, they will definitely finish this week.
Well, we can start at 10 tomorrow if you feel
Yes.
that when you
Yes.
look at the whole week,
Yes.
everything should be fine, and we start early only if we need to.
If you need to, yes.
to
10
make
o'clock
sure.
then, Chair.
So 10 o'clock should
10
be
o'clock.
fine tomorrow.
Thank you, Chair. I
Okay,
would
all right.
appreciate that. Thank you.
We are then going to adjourn for the day, and tomorrow we'll start at 10 o'clock.
Thank
We
you.
adjourn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All rise.